Hi, I'm Bob McCoskrie. Welcome to Straight Talk for our 13th episode. It's a busy week for us because we're preparing for our forum on the family this Friday. We've got almost 800 delegates attending and our first ever gala dinner on Thursday night with 260 plus attendees. The Thursday night gala, we're celebrating Family First's independence from the government as a result of our deregistration for promoting ideas that the state doesn't like, you know, things such as marriage is one man, one woman, and mothers and fathers matter. But anyway, for tonight, we are everywhere. You can watch on our website, familyfirstnz, obviously on our YouTube channel as well, where you can comment. You can go to our Facebook page. I'm doing this really slow so Gordon can keep up, or my Facebook page or my LinkedIn page as well. We're even on Twitter with Elon Musk, Family First NZ and Bob McCoskrie NZ. And if you're on Facebook or YouTube, as I said, you can share your comments to the panel and submit any questions you may have. Right, welcome the panel. We've got two regulars unavailable this week, Ronji and Ashley. And G team, we've got a fairly stacked woman panel tonight, although of course what is a woman? But as far as I can tell, it's 4-3. So perhaps I'll just deal with the dudes because this might be the only time we actually get a word in. So Alfred, how are you?
Yeah, look, it's great and welcome to those from the West Auckland, home of the Pioneers, the Waitakere Rangers, where famous people like Murray Helberg and Arthur Lydiard used to run, and All Blacks like Sir Michael Jones. An amazing place because the best is always from the West. Okay, excellent, thanks. And to Christchurch, Bruce, do you want to do a sales pitch for Christchurch? I mean, you did win the...
after listening to Alfred, I'll have to say something about the obvious thing, the home of the Crusaders, where rugby is distilled and won.
Yeah, okay. Right, now on our female panel, we have Ala up the top there, who's very busy organising a big conference for Friday. Ala, nice to have you on board.
Nice to be on tonight.
Yep. Christine in Taupo, I hear there's a cold snap coming through. I hope you're ready for that, Christine.
It's here. It's freezing.
Is it? Okay.
Warm in my house, though.
Okay. And further south in Wellington is Dr. Ate Moala. How are you?
Very good. Malolele, everyone. Wellington is lovely and warm. Always.
Well, I don't think it'll be as warm as up north, which is where Dr. Shri Trotter is. And how are you, Shri?
Pretty good. It's a little bit wet up here, surprise, but we're doing good, thank you.
Okay, I think you've got that storm first that's coming down the rest of the country. Right, team, our cartoon image of the week goes to the story from the UK about the government. They're investigating a school in Britain where a 13-year-old girl was branded despicable because the teacher branded her despicable because she rejected her fellow pupils' request to be identified as a cat. And two Year 8 pupils at Rye College in East Sussex, and one of the girls secretly recorded the conversation with the teacher, and the school is now being investigated. So I thought this cartoon was particularly apt. It's a parent-teacher interview, and the teacher says, quote, "This term your son has identified as a cat. I gave him an F grade because the school still has a mouse problem." And does anybody need me to explain that? And video of the week, also from the UK. I'm not sure what's in the water in the UK, but believe it or not, panel, the political question of the week in the UK is, can women have a penis? Now, spoiler alert team, the answer is no. And interviewers asked the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, and the Liberal Democrats, Sir Ed Davey. Liberal Democrats, I think, is a bit like the ACT Party, and this was their responses.
A woman can have a penis.
Nick, I'm not... I don't think we can conduct this debate with, you know...
Sorry, have I offended you in some way?
No, it's just... I just...
Can a woman have a penis?
Well, I've just answered that question.
They can.
Listen, I've made it really clear that if people, the vast majority of people will have the same gender as their biological sex, but a small number won't.
So a woman can have a penis?
Well, quite clearly.
Okay, well, that's interesting there, but they both want to be the Prime Minister of the UK. The current Prime Minister of the UK seemed to figure out the answer, although he didn't seem too proud of it.
Recently that 99% of women, I quote, of course, haven't got a penis, he said. What percentage would you put it at?
So I have a slightly different point of view to him on this, and I've been very clear that when it on this topic,
it's 100%.
Yeah, of course. But I think the first thing to say is, look, we should always have compassion and understanding and tolerance for those who are thinking about their gender. Of course we should, right? We're a compassionate and understanding societies, and we will always remember that. But when it comes to these issues of protecting women's rights, women's spaces, I think the issue of biological sex is fundamentally important.
Okay, so they're obviously having trouble just answering it a simple yes or no. But we should all be like President Biden, who can definitely figure it out. Have a listen to this quote about the woman in his cabinet.
Half the women in my cabinet, more than half the people in my cabinet, more than half of the women in my administration are women.
Okay, isn't that brilliant? Half the women in his cabinet are women. So that is a fantastic way to start. I don't know what it is about politicians, they can never give a straight answer. Anyway, speaking of straight answers, it's time to get into the free speech moment. Let's do it straight away. And Bruce, we're going to kick off with you, and you want to talk about the duty of punishment. So your 90 seconds or so starts now.
Well, after listening to all that, it's hardly surprising that young people are not at ease. Anxiety is so prevalent, it's being reclassified under the growing umbrella of mental health. Identity confusion, spiritual and sexual, is a vexatious problem, especially for girls. Teacher confidence is being undermined by the politicising identity of self-creation. The prevailing psychology is that problems of youthful behaviour are a consequence of unfulfilled desire, an unrealised need or flaw in the system. Schools should be places where a young person should feel safe without the urge to misbehave. And if one should misbehave, the proper response is a conversation with a counsellor. Neither discipline nor punishment stirs the mind because misbehaviour primarily springs from unrealised needs and not from flawed human nature. Once unrealised needs are resolved, the offender's essential goodness will blossom. That, however, is a profound misunderstanding of human nature. The significance of real guilt and the comfort of goodness is elusive. The adult's failure to accept responsibility for the intellectual guidance and moral authority over children is a serious neglect of duty. Teaching a child the humility of respecting truth is a responsibility of every generation. Let me quote from the distinguished 20th century philosopher Hannah Arendt. By being emancipated from the authority of adults, the child has not been freed, but has been subject to a much more terrifying and truly tyrannical authority, the tyranny of the majority. When schools remove the structure of order that involves punishment, the result will not be the utopian flourishing of the unbridled child. Instead, we will have anarchy, the power of the stronger child over the weaker. And that, I would have thought, isn't what we want.
Very good. Thank you, Bruce. Right, we move on to Christine, and your topic is you want to give a shout out to part of our country. So your 90 seconds or so starts now.
Thank you, Bob. Look, I know, of course, that we have 2 islands in this country, but having spent a lot of time in the South Island over the last 8 months, I've got a new business down there and I'm spending a lot of time there. I just want to say we seem as different as chalk and cheese. It's like we are 2 different countries and a whole different way of living happens in the South, or that's what it seems to me. They are much more conservative than the North, there is no doubt about that. But they're very open about having conversations that they want to learn and they want to understand what's happening in the other part of New Zealand because they know it's totally different. But I've really enjoyed the openness. I've enjoyed their humour because they do laugh at themselves. They think they're a bit redneck and they know it. But not everyone's like that. And I've absolutely loved my time in the South. And maybe it's because I'm getting older and I'm just more and more drawn to the conservative part of life. But I say good on you. Keep on doing it. And don't give in to being woke, because I didn't find one of you that was, and it was refreshing. So thank you.
Very good, thank you. Now, Cherie, you want to talk about the Wellington City Council. I'm fascinated to know why. So your 90 seconds or so starts now.
Okay, so, sorry. The Wellington City Council have been discussing a really important issue for Wellington, which is recognising the state of Palestine, lighting up the Michael Fowler Centre to recognise Nakba Day, and becoming a sister city with Ramallah. Well, Wellingtonians might quite rightly wonder where is Ramallah and what is Nakba Day. And many people did react to this and suggested that their councillors fix the bloody burst pipes, as it was said, and try and get the buses running on time. So I've been to Ramallah a couple of times, and the last time I was there, we ran into a Palestinian lawyer. He was a human rights lawyer. And he complained to us, he'd been trying to get a case looked at of a human rights issue with a school student. He said to us, the authorities are not interested in human rights unless they can blame Israel. And he described his leaders as gangs. And so I wonder if the councillors in Wellington really know what they're getting in for. Do they know that the LGBTQ community there are tortured and even killed? That if Jews are found there, they can be lynched? That Christians are persecuted there? Do they know that there's a femicide problem, that there's no laws against domestic violence? Do they know about the corruption of the political system there? Because I just really wonder whether it's better for the Wellington City Council to try and fix the burst pipes and stop their lamps from falling on the streets.
Well said. Now, Arte, you also wanted to talk about the Wellington City Council. You've heard what Cherie had to say. Do you want to add anything to that?
Absolutely agree with Cherie. We've got stuff to sort out here in Wellington, like our sewer, our pipes. But it seems like, they have had a vote, and 8 of the 16 councillors are very pro for this motion, which is not the role of local council. It's the role of the central government. So it doesn't seem like that they understand, that the local council understand what their job is supposed to be. And also the Ministry of Foreign Affairs has already advised the Wellington City Council and said to them, this is not their role, but they're obviously pushing some agenda, and the meeting is on this coming Thursday, the 29th. So it's good for people to write in and get your letters in by Wednesday. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Right, Bob, you're next, and your 400 seconds starts now. The first anniversary of the overturning of Roe v. Wade was over the weekend. And when I was on Q&A last year regarding our deregistration as a charity, Jack Tame asked me about the overturning, which had just happened, and he said, did I agree that the majority of New Zealanders support abortion? Now, the answer is yes, just over half according to polling, but it's not a simple yes-no answer. Before I tell you what New Zealanders think, a poll last week out of the US showed that 77%, 3/4, agree there should be at least some limits on abortion by 15 weeks of the pregnancy, the point at which the baby can feel pain. Now, when the radical abortion law was being rammed through here in New Zealand, despite the very best efforts of Alfred and other pro-life MPs, we commissioned some polling through an independent marketing company. And at that time, abortion was legal to 20 weeks with only exceptional cases after 20. Under our new radical law, it's now effectively legal up to birth. That's the fact. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. So I got the polling company just to ask, how many weeks should abortion be legal up to? I said to them, don't mention the number of weeks under the current law. Let's see what their natural response is. Only 4% believed it should be later than 20 weeks, as our new law allows, and just 9% supported 20 weeks, which it currently was. 50% thought the time limit should be shorter than the current 20 weeks, and a further 36% were unsure. Now, of those who did pick a time limit, guess what that was? 15 weeks was the median choice. And interestingly, more than half of women, 56%, thought that the time limit should be less than 20 weeks. And incredibly, 53% of those who generally support abortion thought the time limit should be less than 20 weeks. A third of abortion supporters said 10 weeks or less. What's my point? Even abortion supporters are more conservative in their support than what the radical pro-abortion politicians delivered with their extreme law. And that's why we must never give up the fight for life, because one day, hopefully soon, New Zealand will have its moment to undo one of the most anti-life laws ever passed in this country. Alfred, you get the final say for the free speech, and you are speaking about living on a prayer, and your 90 seconds or so starts now.
So I had an interview just last week, and one of the questions that was asked of me was, so where's it all gone wrong for us as a country and our communities? You know, what's been the problem? And inside of me, the answer that came out was, we've forgotten how to pray. And I remember that in 1986, those of us who can remember back that far, there was a famous song by a band called Bon Jovi, and they wrote a song called Living on a Prayer. And it was an interesting song because it actually talked about working class people like Tommy, who worked on the docks, Gino, who worked in the diner, and they'd say things like, we've got it, you know, we've got each other, we'll give it a shot, you know. And then it goes on about we're halfway there because why? Because we're living on a prayer. You know, I began to think that Parliament began in New Zealand in 1854, and the very first debate was not about sheep, was not about education or even the economics. It was actually about prayer. And an MP from Christchurch turned around and said, point of order, Mr. Speaker, before we debate, deliberate, and eventually decide the affairs of our nation, we need divine guidance. And here's what they prayed, a prayer that lasted 165 years. Almighty God, humbly acknowledging our need for thy guidance in all things, and laying aside all private and personal interests, we beseech thee to grant that we may conduct the affairs of this house and of our country for the glory of thy holy name, the maintenance of true religion and justice, the honour of the Queen, and the public welfare, peace and tranquility of New Zealand, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. 4 things that come out of their prayer I just want to cover. First of all, it talks about humble. You know, humility is what we really need. And from our leaders, it was a reminder that every time you take on this role, you're meant to have a state of humility, not hubris at times. And hubris is a good word which means almost extreme pride. The second thing is about service, putting all personal and private interests aside. You know, we're called public servants to serve the community and the nation, but instead of service, we now have self-interest. Number 3 was about values. You know, it talks about true religion, and that was based on the Westminster Confession of Faith. Why? Because our governance is based on the Westminster form of governance. And so therefore, moral values, godly values, biblical values were all part of what we have, but instead of values now, we're all about choice. And the last thing was about honour. It talks about honouring the Queen, we'd honour the King now, and it talks about that we honour the fact is that these prayers are now prayed in Jesus' name. We no longer have the value or the principle of honour. Instead, it's more like entitlement. We deserve, we should have. It's about me, it's about us, it's about we, and we've forgotten those things and the power of honour. So, you know, Bon Jovi and others talked about that as a nation, if we want to see things shift and change, we need to learn how to pray, and especially in Parliament, let's bring back the old parliamentary prayer before it was taken out. Amen.
Well done, Alfred. Now, last week your song was, what was it? We've Got the Power by Snap. And your song this week is Bon Jovi. Oh my gosh, you are showing your age, Boomer. Okay, let's just have a look at just some of the comments that have come. Gabrielle Pinky says, love this. I think that's referring to you, your one, Alfred. Evangelist Dord Joshua says he is watching from Pakistan. So there we are, we've got some international coverage. Not the first overseas person that said that they're watching. Mary says there's 3 islands. Who was that? That was Christine. Well, actually 4 if you count Waiheke Island as well. Hey, I mean, well, yeah.
They're right.
There's probably in Great Barrier. Yeah, that's right. Cherie says the West is in so much trouble. That's because Alfred lives there. Mary says West is best from the West, and Veronica says West is best, otherwise it wouldn't rhyme. There we are. Okay. Right. Let's move on, team. First story. A New Zealand high school teacher has had his teaching registration cancelled after he refused to use the preferred pronouns and name for a 14-year-old student in his maths class who was in the process of transitioning from a girl to a boy. In other words, because the teacher wasn't willing to lie and compromise his own conscience, he's lost his career. Now, before we get comment from the panel on this case, I just want to check out some recent cases that I found. Firstly, this teacher was censured after assaulting his daughter, but kept the registration. He wrapped his hands around the teenage daughter's neck, shook her vigorously and threatened to kill her. After discovering the nature of her sexual activity, he can still teach. This preschool teacher drove to work drunk, had 3 drink driving criminal prosecutions, and had previously appeared before the tribunal relating to alcohol use, but can still teach. A Whakatane teacher was censured for serious misconduct after forcing students at a school camp to strip to their underwear and stand with their noses against a tree, but can still teach. This teacher was a convicted drug cultivator, failed to comply with conditions placed on her during disciplinary proceedings 7 years earlier, and failed to tell the teaching council about the criminal charge, but guess what? Can still teach. This Christchurch teacher has been found guilty of serious misconduct after making inappropriate and offensive comments on a podcast about students, a former girlfriend, his sex life, and going to work slightly high on drugs. But guess what? He can still teach. And this oldie but a goodie, the teacher fabricated grades for work not done by students, forged the head of the department's signature and lied about what classes she had taught. The teacher feared she was going to be fired, so hatched a plan for one of her students' grandfathers to threaten the principal. Despite her unprofessional actions and serious misconduct, the Teachers' Council said she can still teach. And finally, there was this teacher. 22 parents laid a joint formal complaint against a handout given to pupils aged 11 to 13 that detailed 5 different legal classifications of sex: genital, digital, object, oral and anal. This is to 12-year-olds. The 2-page document also included details about different sexual acts, such as using hands and feet to sexually pleasure someone, and sex toys. But yep, that teacher is still in the classroom. And just before I go to the panel, this is a recent post from the Teachers' Council telling everybody to celebrate Schools Pride Week. So that gives you an idea of their cultural, religious worldview. So let's go around the panel and let's just find out what you think of the decision. And Bruce, I'm going to come to you first because you've got the teaching experience. You're involved in the education sector. What's your thoughts?
Well, we're looking at something that's never happened before. It's been going on for a while, and the results and the criticism of it go on ad nauseum, but very few people seem to be taking notice, and I'm not sure that I can add very much to it, except there are obvious things that one can say, and that is that we've got a situation arising where the authority of one's feelings are paramount. They're the authority of the way we think about the world. What I feel about something is sacrosanct and above criticism, it would seem to me. C.S. Lewis called it the poison of subjectivism, if you remember, and it's a lie. And so underlying all of the problem, it's a lie that we refuse to sort of understand or come to grips with. A man cannot become a woman and a woman can't become a man. That is the scientific, the historical, the biological, the traditional, the spiritual, and common sense truth. And we just seem to be swamped with sophistry and the demand for hate speech legislation in order to shut it down. And it goes on. We get told that over and over again, but whether it's getting through or not, I'm not sure.
Okay, Cherie, what do you think?
Well, I certainly agree that it's a problem that it was the students' feelings that this was all based on, that her feelings were hurt and she was uncomfortable with the teacher. I had a look at the report, and I do have questions actually over the way that the teacher dealt with the situation. The student did try to negotiate with him and suggested that he could use her she pronouns, she, her pronouns, but wanted him to use the preferred name, but the teacher refused to do that. So I think it's a little bit more complicated. He also went on to sit down and tell her his views about her spiritual condition and basically, preached to her, I would say. And I do wonder whether that's stepping outside of his role as a maths teacher. That's what he's employed to do. So I'm not sure that it's as black and white as it appears on the surface.
No.
Okay, let's find out from Ate. What was your thoughts on it?
I think before we can look into this, because we do not know the specific details, but I think it's important, and I'm speaking to my Pacific people, because when this law was pushed through during the level 4 COVID lockdown in 2021, it was very clear what is the outcome that they were wanting. To alienate the parents, to criminalize teachers, parents, caregivers who do not agree with the agenda that is being pushed, because we know that gender dysphoria has been with us for hundreds of years. And it's just over the last 10 years that we've seen this, huge explosion of this, the transgender, which is very different from gender dysphoria, where the majority, up to 95% of the kids who have gender dysphoria, they revert to their natural birth sex at the end of puberty. And usually what most parents and health professionals do, you just walk lovingly with them in a time of their life where they are vulnerable, hormones and stuff. But I think now it's very clear the outcome that we're seeing in what you've showed us, Bob. This is the outcome in the agenda that is being pushed to criminalize those who think otherwise, or who care, parents and teachers. So I think this is what we're talking about. And for me, I just don't believe anything that the mainstream media herald. I mean, they're funded by the government to just say what they that is being pushed, but funded by the taxpayers. Thank you.
Christine, did you have concerns about the decision, or do you think the teacher didn't handle it correctly?
I don't think he handled it very well at all. And I also want to make the point that there are people that are born without a particular sex and get to puberty before they know it. That's a whole different situation than someone being asked what they are and deciding it's something different than them. And I think we have to separate that out. And I certainly hope that that young person wasn't in that situation, because it is really different. But the thing that concerns me is all the examples you gave, Bob, where they are appalling behaviours by teachers and they still continue to work. Yes, this teacher didn't handle it well and he probably needs some coaching on how to react if that's the way he felt. But for him not to be allowed to work anymore and all the others to be fine is a disgrace.
Okay, so Ala, I mean, are we basically saying to teachers that if someone identifies as the opposite sex and wants to change their name, teachers just have to go with the flow?
I guess based on this particular case, that's what it's looking like. I think in the council's decision making, they called his arguments unrealistic hysteria, despite the growing evidence of detransitioning and also in terms of adolescence at that stage and making life decisions and things around identity. There is growing evidence that shows that young people aren't necessarily making big life decisions at that stage, that they go on to later on in adulthood and regret. So I think there is a growing intolerance to anyone that's going to speak out against the gender ideology and all this woke rubbish. So it's quite concerning that there's a standard for some. So it seems like it's rules for you guys, but not for us. I think they talked about parents not being in the picture. I think there's, obviously the teacher didn't handle it as well as he could. And I think to lose your license and your job over it, I just think that's unfair. But also, it's a teachers' council. Like, just the whole education sector just needs to be reset. And there's a whole lot of loopies managing the whole sector. So maybe that's why we've got this decision.
Yeah, I mean, it was a case where I wish he'd got some legal advice and he'd come to us first. And he sort of turned up to the Teachers' Council and gave them a sermon, which he didn't give the child. He said he didn't think the child should go down that path, that it was sin, but that was the extent of the sermon. The sermon was to the tribunal. But interestingly, I just want to show you what the tribunal said. They said, even without the verbal submission of the teacher, which they didn't like, even without that, we would have found the charge proven on the pure conduct alone. In other words, not using the preferred name was guilt enough to lose your career. Ironically, they said, just before I come to you, Alfred, the council said that they weren't trying to punish the teacher and that, quote, he's entitled to his views and religious beliefs. So go figure. Alfred, are we in trouble in the education sector, or teacher just handle it badly?
Yeah, well, he wouldn't have been in trouble if he came and saw you, Bob, because, I mean, you've got a great story where you had someone come along and got the support and help. And the thing is that, look, the truth is, this teacher is an example of actually the frustration that lots of people have in our communities. I don't blame him. I mean, he could have done it better, but, you know, he's reflective of a lot of people who've just had enough being told what to do, what to think, how to speak, how to act, and they're just saying enough is enough. You know, and so I've got some sympathy for him. And you gave some great examples, as Christine said, about actually if he'd had some help, had some support, he could have showed the inconsistencies, and isn't it interesting, of the lawyers and teachers that were there and what they're trying to do. Look, when it comes down to it, the interviews you had of the videos of the politicians in the UK, where people were afraid to actually answer the question, and it comes down to this. We've got a culture now where it's more important to belong rather than what it is to believe. And as long as people can belong, it doesn't matter what they're thinking, what they're doing. Look, we'll get to the point, and we already are there, where people will saying that even if you're pedophilia, then actually it's okay. We're going to welcome you and we're going to accept you, because that's where our values are now. It's the value of belonging rather than the value of believing of what's right and wrong. And so that's why people have got sort of caught into this. And you know, there's organisations like the Society for Evidence-Based Gender Medicine who are turning around and saying, we're not listening to evidence anymore, right? We don't believe in evidence. Why? Because the value of belonging is more important. It's overtaken everything, common sense. And so that's my real concern. And the last thing I want to say is that now the whole debate is politicised. You've got politicians now in places of influence who are no longer saying about what they believe. Oh, they'll fumble there. But you notice it's that classic sort of say, well, you know, we want everyone to feel like they belong, we care for them, and on and on and on. How about you just speak the truth? How about we just turn around and say, actually, here's what's important. Speak out some values. But at the moment, you know, that's where my biggest concern is.
Okay, let's just a couple of comments. Is this one from Mihi, who says, can the teacher still come and see you, Bob? Absolutely. Because we're wondering if this can be appealed, because it does set a dangerous precedent. And the other one is from Lisa. Do teachers of other faiths get targeted in this way? That's a very good question. I mean, the one thing, panel, that I was interested in, and I did a McBlog on this in a bit more detail, but there was one word that was missing from the whole decision and the whole discussion, and the word was parents. The parents were not mentioned as to the name change or the involvement. Now, the problem is that groups like Inside Out are being paid by the government to advise schools. And just to show you what they're telling schools, they are saying that staff and students are to address transgender kids with a different name and or pronouns than those used at home, if that's what the child wants. They say legally there is no minimum age at which a young person can request to change their personal information, so the school's got to take it into account. But then it says, regardless of which kind of change a student would like to make, it's essential that schools check with the students whether they have told their parents, whānau, about their change of name, pronoun or gender marker. So the advice schools are getting is effectively to keep parents out of the loop, just as the same with sneaking a teenager off for an abortion or to go possibly on puberty blockers. So it effectively says that schools are being excluded from the process. And I think, Bruce, that's what you were getting at, wasn't it? That schools have taken over the mantle of parenting our kids.
Yes, they have. Yes, they have.
And we're in trouble.
They have. Yeah. It's been going on for a while, but yes, that's true.
Okay. Just before I move on, any other comments on this case? Because it does set a dangerous precedent, and I think we should be concerned about it. Actually, our next topic is actually, let's just check. Irwi says, oops, hang on, let me just get that one. Surely the parents can sue. Well, it depends whether the parents okayed it all. You can't actually change your name until you're 18, I think it is, unless you have consent of the parents. 16, sorry. And, until you, or 16 or 18, I can't remember. But basically, this was a 14-year-old telling the teachers that their name had changed, and we don't know whether it had been done legally or whether the parents know. Right, let's move on anyway, team.
So just want to, Bob, just a quick comment on that. You know, the reality is that Inside Out is only giving advice. The school doesn't have to take it. Under tomorrow's schools, all 2,500 schools in our country actually are autonomous. You know, there's a charter that guides them. There's NEGs and NEGs, National Administration Guidelines and Education Guidelines. But in actual fact, the governing body of that school can make choices. And so they don't have to take that advice. They can choose. This is the power where the power of parents need to begin to speak out. You know, local parentis, and Bruce will like this, it's that Latin word that says in the place of the parent. And that's what teachers and principals and educators used to know. Because why? It's a role of responsibility to act on behalf of, but to act consciously and carefully. And at the moment, they're not doing that. So I think the thing is that schools need to say, they need to push back. Parents need to challenge. It's not good enough just to sit around and just take it.
Okay. Any other comments on that topic before we move on? All good?
Well,
right.
we should know. I guess we should remember that the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights, you remember that? It was there somewhere in the background. It did say that the parent was the primary educator of the child, not the school.
Yeah, I would just add, Bob, that all this takes away from the education of our children. And why are we surprised that our academic rates are declining when we have all this attention, funding, resources given to matters like this, which is about the feelings of a privileged group? I mean, there are lots of minority groups that also feel hurt for a variety of reasons, and they don't get the same attention to their feelings, and so we're sort of creating this victimhood mentality that's not good for the student, and it's certainly not good for our education overall.
Okay, just this comment before we move on. Mrs. Lott says, as a Christian, praise God that the man stood for God's word. Thank you, Mr. Math teacher. May we have more men unashamed of the gospel in our nation. Mihi says, parents, teachers, communities should all stand together for our children, grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Right, let's move on, team. Dairy owners want parents held to account for young offenders' crimes. Campaigners have urged the government to take a hard line on retail crime and are saying that parents should be held accountable for children too young to face prosecution. The Dairy and Business Owners Group, alongside the Chinese community, presented petitions with more than 40,000 signatures. And the chairperson, Sonny Kaushal, said the government needed to reform the Crimes Act and strengthen power of citizen's arrest. He said there has to be consequences for 14-year-old ratbags that involves making their parents legally responsible for their actions. Kids in trouble need a circuit breaker. It's time for red lines before we have another murder in the society. And I think when they presented the petition, they actually had the parent of a dairy owner that had been murdered. So I want to go around the panel. I'll go in reverse order this time. And basically, should parents be held accountable, and up to what age of the child are the parents accountable for the actions? Alfred, I'm going to start with you because you definitely need to be accountable for your children.
Well, look, I know the pain of a community when we had one of our local dairy owners, and he was tragically killed by two teenagers, 12 and 13. And it was just, it was so tragic, it was so sad. And of course, the first thing people want to do is to give empathy to the victims, but at the same time let's deal with the crime and deal with the parents. Look, one of the things that came out of the review and also out of the investigation was the lack of parental support and care. But also was what the kids were doing instead of actually going to school. There were things like they were playing all of these types of video games and so forth. And things like Grand Theft Auto. And I remember that I was in Parliament and we had a review with the Chief Censor, David Shanks, at that time. And I remember him telling us that one of the biggest challenges that we have in our country is that we've got no way of regulating the amount of content that's actually out there, of ultra-violent content that's actually affecting a lot of our children. And in fact, what happens is that a lot of the content, right, that's out there, most people think that because you can find it on Google, you can get it off a store and off a shop, then it's legal, even when you've got classifications. And he said it's affecting our family life. So I think, Bob, there's two things. Yes, we need to deal with the accountability of crime that's happening, but at the same time, too, one of the biggest drivers is actually in our homes and in our families. We've surrogated actually care to digital devices and stuff like that. And the chief censor himself, David Shank, said it's something that's so hard to peel back now. And unless parents can find a way to actually to have a way of regulating some of that, some of those activities, but more importantly, build great relationship with your children, then we're going to lose them. They don't have to come from poverty and what you call impacted homes. They are all over our society and our community as well. So, yeah, it's a bigger answer. It's should parents be accountable? Yes, they should. But there's a bigger issue around the home.
Okay, Ala, what do you think?
I'm not sure if I have much more to add to what Alfred said. I think obviously, a proverb talks about training a child in the way that he should go so that he doesn't turn from it when he's older. Obviously, parents have a great deal of responsibility for raising children. I think diverting consequences to parents as a result of their child's crimes, also, we're not setting up children to win. We're not setting them up for life because we're not holding them accountable. I'm not sure what the balance is, but I definitely think there needs to be some consequences, whether it's the parents or child. I'm still undecided. I do think we have a generation of parents that aren't holding children accountable, or perhaps to echo what Alfred said, it starts at home, and we've got a generation of parents, and I'm probably going to get a bit of heat for generalising this, but there is a generation of parents that are offsetting parenting and perhaps engaging with their children to devices and to schools and the world and their peers, because if we're going to hold parents accountable for children and their crimes, does that mean we also hold negative peer influence? Because that has a big role in this kind of activity. Are we going to hold peers accountable for children and their crimes as well? So I think this probably highlights a bigger issue around the home and needing to be more engaged. How do we support parents in raising their children? Because I think there's a big gap in that. How do we as communities get our families and raise their children as well?
Okay, Christine, you've previously worked for the Sake of Our Children Trust. You're passionate about this issue. Should parents be held accountable?
Look, I have a slightly different view to the rest of the panel. I've worked in this area most of my life. I was in welfare for 24 years and I was inside people's homes. And because of my continuing interest in child abuse and the rate of it in New Zealand, which is utterly and absolutely appalling, I don't think there'd be much point in trying to hold the parents to account. And even the best of parents can have kids where things go wrong. But I'm telling you, a lot of the kids that are involved in this crime, and I've been in those homes and I've witnessed the situations and I've been to family group conferences, and those parents couldn't give a toss. They're not involved with their kids anyway. Drugs and alcohol come way before feeding them, let alone nurturing anything responsible or ethical or moral in those children. And we can make excuses for those families, but they're everywhere. There are thousands and thousands, and the state has tried to intervene over and over again, and there has never been a logical answer. We can pretend it's all over society, but I bet if you analyse the 14-year-olds who are involved in those crimes, they're the ones with either no dad in the home or both parents totally absent and couldn't give a toss. I think we make excuses. I really do.
Yeah, and I mean, look, it's probably, this isn't a recent development. I mean, when I was working in South Auckland, visiting homes, it was, 25, 30 years ago, it was the same thing. It was parents who really didn't care, didn't even know their kids were missing, or had no curfew of any type, no responsibility. They almost had given up on parenting.
And Bob have done disgusting things to those children. New Zealanders sit at home in their safe environment and think that all children are brought up in this country in this way. We feature as one of the worst countries in the OECD for what we do to our children, sexual abuse, beating and murdering. We don't even talk about it anymore, which absolutely infuriates me. We cannot put a label on it because it might label a particular group, and oh my goodness, we can't have that. Those children don't matter. Our political games matter, and I think that's really, really sad.
Okay, well, Ate, I mean, it does beg the question, has the state demanded so much control over our kids that parents are just checking out and don't care anymore?
I agree with what Alfred has said. I think at the end of the day, we know what works. Strong families, fathers at home, strong marriages. And, it doesn't mean that we are immune, but we know what works. But of course, the government is absolutely just wanting to destroy and alienate parents. So we already know that. With regard to crime in New Zealand, the government has failed miserably. Good program that has worked, and we know is Man Up, that Brian Tamaki has run, but of course not funded by the government. And the MPs have also acknowledged that it's the only program that has worked with regard to gangs and stuff, but two things they wanted to do was to remove the faith element of the program and for the government to have 60% control, which is disgusting. Yeah. So with regard to addressing crime and with the children, we need to talk to people who know what has worked and who's got hope, because we can't be hopeless in this whole situation. And it's not just the fatherless home. It's not just those who are, in the worst extreme. There's also white collar workers, professionals who are absolutely doing dirty work, like Michael Wood, for example. What you sow, you will reap. It's like a Hunter, Biden. You got Mr. Biden there, and then Hunter is just being a spoiled brat. What's happening here in New Zealand? It's, both extreme. Thanks.
Okay, let's move on to Bruce. What do you think, Bruce?
Well, I tend to agree with a lot that's been said. I take Christine's point that we do have a lot of families who are dysfunctional, and there's no doubt about that. But I suspect if you went back to, seeing I'm the oldest one here, if you went back to my youth, I don't think we'd be asking this question or considering this question, because the problems that have given rise to it didn't really exist in any kind of intensity then as they do now. And I think, quite apart from the problems of disintegrating families for a whole lot of reasons, there's also an ideology that's seeped into the culture, which is not helping parental understanding and helping them bring up their children. We've got an idea that's seeped into our culture, which is essentially contradictory. On the one hand, we are moving towards giving young people autonomy, in the sense that we're giving a 12-year-old the permission to have a puberty blocker and making up his or her own mind on that. And yet, on the other hand, we're saying that a child is not responsible for a crime they might break at age 13 or 14 or 15. So it reminds me of something I learned way back a long time ago, that definition of absurdity. And that you hold two ideas in the head at once, two conflicting ideas in your head at once, and you believe both of them. And that seems to be the kind of situation we're in now. We're so lacking in understanding of certainly in confidence of what we're doing, because there is so much working against a parent being responsible. It's much harder.
Okay, Sheree, what's your thoughts on this?
Well, it's a multifaceted problem. The problem's multifaceted, the answers are multifaceted. And so, yeah, it's complex. I think one of the things that we've seen is that when the smacking law came in, that really undermined parental authority. And I think that had a widespread effect on authority in general. When you take away that authority from parents, it has a flow-on effect. Really, it didn't affect those who were actually abusing children. They continued to abuse children, but it penalised the good parents who all of a sudden were under threat of being criminalised for disciplining their children. And so this whole concept of discipline has been undermined by governmental interference, like that particular one. And I agree with Christine that we have a huge problem that's not being addressed, and I agree with Ate that it's not just a one-dimensional problem, and that it affects different sectors of society, although I think it does affect one sector more than the other. But I would also agree that the answer is not with the government. I think the answer is in the community, and our communities, our churches, our marae, need to step up and look after our whānau, our iwi, our church community, and I've seen in the local community as well that they've set up a Man Up program, a Legacy Women's program, and it's doing amazing things. And I know that the government has stopped that program from going into prisons, for example. So, you know, when there are these effective programs, why is the government stopping them from functioning? So I think we have the answers within our communities. There is a big problem. We need to deal with it, but everyday people need to sort of rise up and deal with it. And I don't think we'll find answers from the government.
No. Well, I mean, actually, I was just going to say, Christine, I don't know if you remember back in about 2008, we organised a nationwide 3-minute silence for child abuse victims. And one of the solutions we said was that the government needed to take their hands off this area and invest more in community groups who were working in their local areas, as Cherie just alluded to. As we know, I was amused to see over the weekend that some people on the left started calling for an independent body to watch over the old Child, Youth and Family, which is now Rangatamariki. We were calling for that back in 2008, if you remember.
Absolutely agree. I've always thought they should have a board, a proper board that they report to, and a balanced board, but we'll see.
Yeah, but the government think that they can answer it. I mean, Alfred, you would have seen that even in government, that government thinks that they have to do the job. They seem to be allergic to really empowering local communities who I think are far more efficient and effective, like, as some people have alluded to, the Man Up program, which is doing some great work.
Yeah, look, I agree with Cherie that really the answers are not in government, and we just need to shift in our communities to realise that it's time for us to, you know, shut the doors, close the curtains, and have our own conversations. I remember talking to a community like that, and there's two things you need to ask yourself. First of all, what are we going to take responsibility for? Doesn't belong to government, doesn't belong to anyone else. It'll be our families, our homes, our relationships that are critically important. Then ask the second question is, what do we need help with? Because at the moment, we also too need to know what is it we need to help and assistance with as well. So I think that's really important. The last thing to say is that, you know, when we talk about accountability, accountability is not always a stick. Accountability is also really important so that people understand the importance that, you know, as parents, that actually you can have some tough conversations. You can talk about it, but you walk alongside them. You know, it's not a blame game. It's turning around and saying, actually, I'm going to take responsibility for this. And many times we're not, because we've created a culture where actually it's like New Age philosophy, Bob, you know, there are no absolutes. Absolutely. There are no absolutes. So now it's the freedom of choice over the values of things that are really important.
Yeah. Okay, before we move on, any final topics, team? Anybody want to comment on this one? Leslie says the Helen Clark Labor government took away consequences for bad behaviour. Now we have a generation for whom there are no consequences, and parents in society are helpless to stop the roller coaster. Colin asks, are schools undermining parents? Mihi says, thank you, Ate. Man Up is amazing. OT is not the answer. Irene, I think is how you say it, says strong faith and strong families. Colin says, despite the huge amounts of money towards child poverty, nothing changes. Peregrini says, wisdom from Christine Rankin, thank you. And Ethel says, thank you, Christine, great delivery. And Bob McCoskrie says, Christine, when are you standing for Parliament? I was just kidding about that last one.
I'm too old and it's a snake pit.
No, never too old. Okay, team. Now, school and family are in a standoff over a teenager's beard. The school aren't too happy. A Bay of Plenty family and the leadership of their son's school are in a standoff because a 17-year-old wants to wear a beard. The father has contacted the Human Rights Commission saying he's been unfairly discriminated against because it's part of his Brazilian culture. But Papamoa College insists the crackdown on facial hair was part of a wider push to improve student presentation in the wake of a parental survey. Now, I was fascinated to see that beards were part of Brazilian culture, so I just did a check, just a bit of a quiz, team. Anybody know who this is?
Yep, Pele.
Pele, well done. One to Alfred. He hasn't got a beard, interestingly. Anybody know who that is?
Bolsonaro, what's his name?
Yeah, Bolsonaro, that's right, the ex-Prime Minister. Anybody know who this is? They're all Brazilians, by the way. Okay, you sporting buffs, that's Ayrton Senna, Formula One. And this is not me on the soccer pitch. Who's this? Oh, you guys.
He's a drama queen.
It's a drama queen.
No beards. No beards.
Isn't that what you soccer players get taught how to act up and pretend that one little nick is like this massive gouge in your leg or something?
Oh, yeah. No, look, he's an absolute agony. That is Neymar da Silva Santos Jr., otherwise known as Neymar. So, panel, can schools set a dress and appearance standard? Is it reasonable for them to tell boys that they need to be clean shaven? Bruce, as the most clean shaven person on our panel, what do you reckon?
Well, of course schools need to set standards, and they do, and we accept that. We may get the odd malcontent who would try and drive his own particular barrow into it and say that his child is following some kind of cultural norm, but I don't think that is serious enough. Certainly the one in Tauranga, was it?
Yeah.
It's just simply not the case. If a school doesn't have rules and doesn't have a set of standards by which, then obviously the answer is chaos. And
okay, but when is it reasonable and not reasonable? Where's the line? Where do you draw the line?
Well, that's a matter, I suppose, that each individual school has to decide and each board has to decide within a framework that's easy enough to work out. So I don't know why there's even a question about whether they have to have standards. Of course they have to have standards. They have standards. I mean, that's the whole point of an education, working out what's going on there. You have certain standards to reach, certain standards with behaviour, certain standards with what you wear. If you're going to go down the continuing road, and I keep mentioning it tonight, I'm reluctant to mention it again, the road of personal autonomy and turning autonomy into some kind of absolute, then you're going to run into even more trouble. But it's not the case, and it says common sense says, well, of course. And we need to support schools. Parents need to support schools as well.
Okay, Alfred, did you ever get sent home from school for having some facial hair?
No, I couldn't even get facial hair when I was at school. But look, the thing is that having been on board of trustees for 15 years, look, what you call Bruce is right. Schools can choose; they can set the standards. The only thing I would say is that, in a cultural sense, I can speak from Pacific culture because in Niuean culture, they had a thing called a tupe, in which a young boy would grow his hair long, and so when he was a child, his hair wouldn't be cut. And so there was definitely a cultural element. In the Cook Islands, they do the same thing too. They call it a paukuturura. In other words, there'd be a ceremony of the cutting of his hair at a particular age with it. So I think there are certain, if he can prove the point that it actually has a cultural significance, in this case, I don't think he can, because a beard is a beard. So there are circumstances that can be proven. I'm not sure in this case this qualifies.
Okay. Cherie, do you think there's cultural reasons to change standards for certain students?
Well, I did the same thing that you did, Bob, and did a bit of a Google search to find out a bit more about this the cultural standards. And I think I found the same photos that you found, but half the photos the men had beards and half the photos the men didn't have beards. I agree with Alfred. If they can prove that there's some sort of cultural thing, and you know, even though it's not on the internet, maybe there is, you know, one little, like we have iwi, maybe there's some tribe that has some cultural significance to the beard. But I think, and I agree, you know, it's this personal autonomy thing, and that is pitted against rules for a school that need to apply to everyone. And, you know, if you're going to allow students to have beards and you want to maintain high standards, how are you going to monitor that? You know, some beards are scruffy. Are you going to say you can have a beard at a certain length? It's just much easier to say no beards, and it's a good thing to maintain, to set a high standard for your students. And I was really, really quite tickled the other day, chuffed, to see a little presentation of the end of term presentation for a kura. So these were little 5-year-olds, and they were all dressed up in their little suits and waistcoats and their hair slicked back. And I thought, good on them. They're setting a high standard so they can feel good about themselves, so they can aspire to be really proud of the way they look. And I think it's a good thing for students to have a high standard to maintain, and I think we could do with high standards throughout our whole of society, actually.
Okay, Ala, you can take this as a compliment, but you're the one who's most recently left school. So did they have standards for you as a student?
I'm not sure if that's that. You know, I grew up in Tonga as well, and uniforms are compulsory, and so is a certain dress standard. So I think they're good for setting discipline and standards, as everyone's alluded to. I was shocked coming moving, so I just saw all sorts of characters and I guess creativity with children and what they wore. Not that I'm judging, but I think having a uniform and high and standards to aspire to sets up a young person for life in terms of discipline, having a high standard of themselves and how they present themselves to the world or in their community. So I think they're good things, but I think the beard thing, I'm not, but I know one school in Auckland was fighting the colour of a hair tie that you can wear. So who knows, if schools can do a hair tie, maybe schools can have beards too. I don't really have a decision about it. I just think it's a little funny.
Okay, and you were just cutting out a little bit. Just when you said about your schooling in Tonga, was that quite strict in terms of appearance?
Yes. Yep. Like you would possibly maybe get a rod of sorts if you were not in the correct uniform, or you'd be disciplined. So I'm very much for that kind of schooling. Maybe I'm a little old school, but I was of culture New Zealand and using that kind of dress standard, or
Okay. Christine, you got in trouble for your dress standard, so I'm not sure if I want to come to you.
Well, yeah, and that was very, very unfair, as most people realised after a period of time. I also had a dress standard for my staff. We had a corporate wardrobe. They didn't have to buy the corporate wardrobe, but they had to dress to that standard. And I sacked many people who wouldn't wear, all men who wouldn't wear ties. But, you know, schools do prepare people for life, and this is part of it. We have to abide by the rules. But I have to tell you that my husband was caned every Friday for his hair going over his collar, and he didn't want to get it cut. He just accepted that he got caned every Friday and had the same discussion with the principal and just kept going to school. And his mother and father never knew a thing. So you pay the price, don't you?
Okay, and so your staff had to wear a tie. Was there pushback?
Absolutely, they had to wear suits. Yeah. All of them had suits, and we had a beautiful corporate wardrobe, so the standards were very high. We revolutionised that department. It was completely different than any other government department, and they were proud of themselves, not only of the way they looked, but the service they provided to New Zealand, and I'm still very proud of them.
And do you think you could enforce that now? Do you think if you were the boss of a company like that? Or a government department?
It depends on the company. There are still plenty of formal organisations and businesses in New Zealand who have a dress standard. There are also many who have made it much more casual. But, you know, I judge someone. If they're selling me something, I judge them on the way they look and how they present. I can't help it. It's just the way I'm conditioned. I might get beyond it, but that's my first impression.
Okay.
We used to talk about this, Bob. I used to try and get you to wear suits years ago. It took a long time.
Yeah, well, it hasn't really worked, has it? Because I've still managed to keep my hairy carafe, so it's still okay.
It's a good look.
Ate, what do you think? Can we set standards still, or have we lost that battle with some kids?
Oh, we can't have a separate rule for just one person. I went to school in Tonga and was like, Allah was very strict. It was important. But then I used to have beautiful long hair like Allah. But then when my son, he had long hair, but when it was time for him to go to school, I had to go and have a haircut with him so that he can go to school. I mean, that was my choice because he needed to comply. And I think for Victor and his dad, maybe they should just remember this is New Zealand, not Brazil. And we can't continue bending the rules to just apply to one person. That's not right.
Yeah. Okay, hey team, go on. Did someone have a final comment?
Oh, I was just going to say, Bob, that on the business of rules for schools, across the board, they should be applied. But I think there are some sensitive areas for culture. Like, for example, if you have a Muslim girl, she may have to be taken into account, or a Sikh boy. So you have genuine concerns, but that in no way affects the need for rules across the board in schools. It's simply taking into account common sense, really.
Yeah. Okay, team, one of the exciting things for those who are attending the forum at the end of this week is you get to meet most of the panellists from StraightTalk. So that's going to be very, very exciting. We were going to talk about one other topic, but we have run out of time. So I'm going to make it first topic for next week, which is about social media and poor mental health of our young people. Got some fascinating stats to share with you. So we will do that. That'll be number one item next week. So to our panel, Alfred, Ala, Ate, Christine, Cherie, Bruce, thank you very much for another great show, and have a great week. We will see you at the forum, and we will see our viewers next Monday night at 8 o'clock for Straight Talk. Have a great week.
Okay, bye. Thank you.